अच्छा लगता है। एजुकेशन के हिसाब से देखा जाए तो अच्छी क्वालिटी है उनके।
It's a great country. People are very friendly, and I think I found myself a great group of friends. So we used to enjoy our college life, our hostel life, and everything was pretty good.
They'd been going through their lives, preparing for what they had hoped was going to be a perfect career. Nobody had quite expected what was to unfold.
Russia has over 100,000 troops gathered on three sides of Ukraine, and fears of an invasion are growing stronger every day. Nations are also pulling out the citizens out of Kiev.
पहले तो हमने कभी सोचा भी नहीं था ऐसा कुछ होगा। हम सोचते थे कि लाइक नॉर्मली एजुकेशन चलेगी।
As thousands of Indian students were suddenly caught up with the conflict escalating.
Right from October onwards, the din about conflict was escalating. And then it was backed up with personnel and people at the border. And then the Western press also was alerting that, yes, some kind of activity, intense conflict was imminent.
हमारे करीब 20,000 बेटे बेटियां जो पढ़ाई के लिए यूक्रेन में थे, तब हमारे सामने सबसे प्राथमिक काम ये था कि इन बच्चों को सुरक्षित वापस लाना है।
PM was after us saying, भाई ये संकट का समय आने वाला है, तैयारी करो, get your systems in order, data collect करो. So we were actually through the month of January trying to build up this database.
So what we did is we created virtual meetings, and I explained that this is just a formality for the government to make sure that you are registered in this portal to understand about your whereabouts.
The portal for registration opened, and in just a matter of hours, data from students began to pour in.
We have even gone to the extent of geotagging them. Literally, their locations were on our smartphones.
At this point, the collection of data revealed three important issues. For one, there were about 22,500 Indian students studying all over Ukraine. Secondly, 40% of India's students were in East Ukraine, closer to Russia's borders. And 40% of Indian students were in West Ukraine, which was far from Russia and relatively safer. The Indian government took anticipatory action, and on 15th of February issued an advisory that all those whose presence in Ukraine was not essential should plan to leave the country temporarily.
I remember my mother telling me, asking me to come back to India, but I just kept telling her that the situation is normal here.
We were actually encountering a problem on the ground. A lot of students did not want to leave. University में लोग उनको कह रहे थे कि आप चले जाओगे, you will lose your academic year. So I can understand उनकी अपनी दुविधा थी.
The Indian government says there could be a war, and the local government says chances of war are slim. The students are obviously going to go by what the local people say.
तो सेम वही क्वेश्चन सामने आता था कि प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, आप कंटिन्यू रखो, अभी भी तो सब कुछ नॉर्मल ही है। एक मिडिल क्लास बंदा जो लोन लेके गया उसके बाद उसको 2 बार सोचना पड़ता है।
Some people actually thought that by allowing foreign students to remain there, maybe that would provide a safety wall in the face of military action.
Medical colleges in Ukraine were not willing to resort to online classes. So they told the students that if you go back home, you will miss exams.
हम तो कर रहे थे एडवाइजरीज, लेकिन हमारा फाइनल ईयर था ना, तो मतलब हमारे लिए पॉसिबल नहीं था बाहर जाना।
The next day, the Indian embassy in Ukraine opened 24-hour hotlines to cater to emergencies. And in New Delhi, a control room was set up with 20 officers.
हमारे यहाँ जब भी कुछ ऐसी समस्या होती है तो we know there will be an operation to be done. first thing you have to do is to set up a control room so that a clearing house, you have to have your teams in place, it's got to be 24/7.
The Prime Minister monitored it personally, of course. All hands on deck operation.
We were inundated with calls. Most of course parents were concerned about the whereabouts of their children, but we were more concerned about where are they? Have you heard anything which is endangering them?
And to add to the chaos were the exorbitant ticket prices of the limited number of flights due to the pandemic.
जैसे जैसे लेट हो रहा था फ्लाइट की प्राइसेस बहुत ज्यादा हो रही थी, उसके बाद से फ्लाइट फुल
The Civil Aviation Ministry has removed the restriction on the number of flights and seats between India and Ukraine in the air bubble arrangement.
On 18th of February, the Embassy of India in Kyiv sent out an advisory stating that Air India was going to operate 3 flights out of Kyiv on 22nd, 24th and 26th of February.
The moment I heard it that I have to operate this flight, my reaction was to say yes. Not every person gets such chance in life to, serve your country.
The first Air India flight carrying around 242 Indian students landed in New Delhi. The nation had been holding its breath, and this was a sigh of relief.
Actually, due to our efforts, करीब 4,000 जो हैं वो 24 फरवरी के पहले निकल चुके थे.
And on 24th February, the world sat up in shock as dread and fear turned into reality.
Russia has essentially launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We are getting you the most dramatic images. You see that on your screen? The explosions, the shelling, that is being reported now.
Whoever tries to threaten our country, Russia's response will be immediate and one that you have never experienced in your history.
What is more worrying for us was there are so many Indian students who were studying in Ukraine. What will happen to them?
Our Air India flight at that point of time was already 5 hours into its flight. When war broke out, a NOTAM was issued that all airspace above Russia has now been closed off. Then there was a panic, and at that point of time, through our emergency satellite phones, we connected with the Air India aircraft, and there was no other option, unfortunately, but for that airliner to turn back home.
This was the same Air India flight that Arshan was supposed to board and return home.
तो मैं जिस वेटिंग एरिया में बैठा हुआ था, एंड देन सडनली वहाँ के जो मैनेजर्स थे एयरपोर्ट के, वो दौड़ते हुए आए वहाँ के सब पैसेंजर्स को बोला कि इवैक्यूएशन वॉर. फिर जैसे ही हम निकले उसी वक्त बॉम्बिंग स्टार्ट हो गई एयरपोर्ट के आसपास, और एयरपोर्ट के अंदर भी जो रनवे था ना वहाँ पे भी बॉम्बिंग हुई थी.
रूस यूक्रेन के बीच तनाव और क्यू में एयरपोर्ट के पास फायरिंग की खबर निकलकर सामने आ रही है. क्यू एयरपोर्ट को खाली कराया गया है, इस वक्त की सबसे बड़ी खबर.
जब वॉर स्टार्ट हुई 24th को, वो फर्स्ट डे और फर्स्ट नाइट हमने अपने रूम में बिताई थी. उस रात तो हम पूरी सोई नहीं.
The Modi government in the past 9 years, or past decade, has established a very stellar record of being responsive to the needs of Indians in trouble, in war zones or disaster zones in different parts of the world.
विश्व भर में फैले हुए भारतीय व्यक्तिगत रूप से कुछ संकट आया, कहीं कोई बीमार हो गया तो वो अपेक्षा करता है कि आप तुरंत हमें ले जाने की व्यवस्था कीजिए. स्वाभाविक है, और हिंदुस्तान का नागरिक भी चाहता है कि भाई ऐसे समय सरकार नहीं करेगी तो कौन करेगा. ये तो सरकार का दायित्व भी है।
As the news about Russia's operations in Ukraine broke out, the Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi was in Uttar Pradesh and decided to rush back to Delhi. As he was flying to Delhi over the river Ganga, a thought crossed his mind.
गंगा से बड़ा पवित्र कुछ नहीं है, ये कार्य भी उतना ही पवित्र है। जैसे मां गंगा संकटों के बीच से पहाड़ों को चीरती हुई सदियों से लोगों के कल्याण के लिए बहती रहती है, ये भी उतना ही पवित्र कार्य है। उस पवित्र भाव ने ही इस पूरे ऑपरेशन को ऑपरेशन गंगा नाम बहुत सहज रूप से निकल गया था।
The Prime Minister called an emergency meeting, assessed the situation on the ground. What is it that we could do to understand how we can bring our students out?
मैंने पहला काम किया, उन बच्चों के माँ बाप का संपर्क करो, उनको विश्वास दो कि सरकार आपके साथ है। सरकार नाम से उनको लगना चाहिए सरकार मेरे घर आ गई है।
Because today we are digital, we were able to actually send government officials to virtually every family.
Ministers and district collectors were directed to make personal visits to each concerned family, who were assured of complete support from the Government of India.
हमने सबसे पहले जैसे ही पेरेंट्स की कॉल आने लगे तो एक कंट्रोल रूम बनाया और उस पर एक ईमेल आईडी हमने दी और एक व्हाट्सएप नंबर जारी किया ताकि कोई भी पेरेंट्स जिनका बच्चा यूक्रेन में या आसपास की यूरोपियन कंट्रीज में स्टक हो गया, कोई भी पेरेंट्स ये सारे डेटा भिजवा दें।
बायोडेटा ले रहे थे कि यूक्रेन में भारतीय स्टूडेंट कितने हैं, तो हर एक की फीडबैक ले रहे थे कि जब टाइम आने पे हम उनकी मदद कर सकें। तो डिसीजन बहुत अच्छा था।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has over the years developed good relations with many world leaders, and for India's interest, he put his statesmanship to the fore. He dialed from his office in New Delhi President Putin of Russia and President Zelensky in Ukraine and requested them in India's interest to allow the creation of green corridors. Now you must understand that the establishment of safe or green corridors is very difficult because it requires the two opposing armies to build trust in each other, to cease fire and to allow people to move out of the conflict areas through these safe corridors. And this is no easy task.
There have been evacuation processes earlier. Did you take those so seriously that your head of state or government actually picked up the phone and spoke? I don't know. I'm not aware. But I do know that my Prime Minister actually did it.
कौन क्या सोचेगा उसके आधार पर हम निर्णय नहीं करते हैं। हम निर्णय करते हैं हम क्या सोचते हैं, किसके लिए सोचते हैं, आखिरकार हम किसके लिए हैं, देशवासियों के लिए है।
We knew that every Indian needs to come out and we just need to be there to make it happen no matter what it takes.
I would say the system started moving on 24th itself. Idea was चार पड़ोसी थे, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania. Later on we added Moldova. तो इन चारों से जितनी जल्दी हम बात कर सकते हैं, take their cooperation, get in people. तो हमें पता था कि इसी चार रास्ते से लोग निकलेंगे।
But there was another challenge.
At that time, vast number of Ukrainians fleeing their country came to Poland. So the few Indians and the few other nationalities who were coming, it was very difficult for them to cross.
फिर हम फर्स्ट चेक पॉइंट पे पहुंचे, हमने वहाँ पे सिचुएशन देखी, बहुत लंबी लाइनें लगी हुई थी, हजारों स्टूडेंट्स थे वहाँ पे। कुछ स्टूडेंट्स अपने कपड़े निकाल के उनमें आग जला रहे हैं हीट के लिए, ठंड काफी थी।
We knew that those kids were standing there in -8, -10 degrees Celsius. Many of them were just wearing jeans and one hoodie. Many of them didn't have much to eat or anything. It was extremely very worrying.
We were getting phone calls, people were moving, saying that, बहुत लंबी line है, 15 kilometers from the border, we can't approach the place. And then we moved our ambassadors physically, saying you go to the border and deal with it.
The first big chunk came without informing anyone. They were just there. So it was about 400-500 students who had collected at the border. We had to work on two fronts. One is tell the Romanian authorities that these are the students coming And I was given an assurance by the foreign ministry that all the requirements like visa requirements, they would be waived.
How do you get the border unclogged? That was a huge issue because we're not the only people getting out. You know, there are a lot of Ukrainians trying to get out.
It was Prime Minister Modi who reached out to the heads of states and requested that they ease visa restrictions and help fast-track border transits.
Through the Romanian authorities, in a slow trickle, people started coming out.
While the Polish border was jammed and things had slowed down, on the flip side, 470 Indian citizens exited Ukraine into Romania, safely through the Siret-Rodny border.
Even though the mechanics of the rescue operation had been put into place, the Indian students in particular caught up there were facing enormous number of challenges.
कंटिन्यू बॉम्बिंग होते थे, हम लोग सेफ नहीं थे उस वक्त, तो हम बंकर से उस वक्त ज़्यादातर रहते थे.
The first bunker that I went to, it was extremely congested.
उसमें भी वाटर सप्लाई का पाइपलाइन, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी का पाइपलाइन, ऐसे एकदम से घुटन सा होता था उसमें.
20 मिनट पहले की बात बता रहा हूँ. इन 20 मिनट के अंदर 3 बार हमें धमाके सुनाई दी और तीनों बार हमारा जो पूरा घर था वो शेक कर गया, पूरा हिल गया पूरा घर.
25,000 plus people. Just to conceive of their evacuation in normal peaceful times is itself an exercise. And when you juxtapose that with something like an active conflict happening, you don't really want to contemplate what difficulties can happen.
26th of February is a date we will all remember as Indians.
We were given a very safe passage to reach Budapest and get all the stranded Indians out. And once we reached there, you could see the terminal filled of all the students, and they're trying to wave at us, they're trying to click pictures.
As the first flight flew out and Operation Ganga had taken flight. Early next day, the second evacuation of Indian students took place as an Air India flight landed back in India with over 250 Indian students.
रात 3 बजे भारतीय छात्रों को लेकर दूसरा विमान दिल्ली लौटा. हमारे प्रधानमंत्री बहुत अच्छे हैं कि हमारे बच्चों को वहां से निकाल के लेके आए.
हम उम्मीद छोड़ चुके थे, कोई उम्मीद नहीं थी कि ये बचेंगे. ये सिर्फ धन सत्ता की मेहरबानी है.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi monitored this exercise on a minute-to-minute basis, held meetings in the Situation Room minimum twice a day, every day. Union Ministers of External Affairs, Jaishankar ji, Piyush Goyal ji, working the phones and working the systems on the ground, along with our embassy staff in all of these 4 countries. Our embassy in Kiev did not leave, even though war had broken out, until our children were safely put on special railway trains which were commissioned by our embassy.
And while other countries had left their nationals to fend for themselves in war-torn Ukraine,
There were students from like Turkey and Africa. You know, when I asked them like, what will happen to you guys, any advisory or something, they were like, no, my country people are actually saying that we are the problem. Thank God, at least our country is doing something for us.
Prime Minister Modi ji had clearly instructed us that while we are evacuating our citizens, we may also take care of our neighboring countries. Whoever requires help, we should extend help.
Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, Sri Lankans, Nepalese, many of them traveled on our special flights home.
I'm very thankful to the Indian Embassy of Kiev for supporting us all the way here as we were stuck in very difficult situations. Also thanking the Prime Minister of India.
Meanwhile, Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has thanked Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the government of India for the help in evacuating Bangladeshi nationals from Ukraine.
दुनिया जब भी संकट में आई, हम पीछे नहीं रहे हैं. फिजी में बहुत बड़ा साइक्लोन आया था, पहुंचे, फिजी के लोगों की सेवा की. हमने हमारे यहाँ मालदीव में, वहाँ बिजली का बड़ा संकट पैदा हुआ. मालदीव में जब तक बिजली की व्यवस्था नहीं हुई, किसी को बिना पानी रहने नहीं दिया था. श्रीलंका के अंदर बड़ा संकट आया था, चावल की जरूरत थी, रुपये पैसे नहीं देखा. वहां का व्यक्ति भूखा नहीं रहना चाहिए. नेपाल के अंदर इतना बड़ा भूकंप आया था, हमारे सामने नेपाल के लोगों की मदद भी करनी थी और नेपाल में जो भारतीय फंसे थे उनको वापस भी लेना है। दोनों मोर्चे पर हम डटे रहे, काम करते रहे। मेरा पहले से आग्रह रहा है कि हमारी विदेश नीति भी ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक होगी। वो सिर्फ भारत के नागरिक ही ह्यूमन ऐसा नहीं है, पूरी मानव जात के लिए मैं सोचता हूं।
Just after the third flight had taken off from Bucharest in Romania, a grievous tragedy was about to unfold for an Indian student, Arjun.
जैसे ही हम लोग अप्रॉक्स मेट्रो स्टेशन से 1.5 या 2 किलोमीटर दूर थे तो फर्स्ट शूट हुआ जो कि मेरे लेफ्ट हैंड साइड के कान के वहां सामने से निकला। 3-4 बुलेट्स मेरे दोनों फ्रेंड्स की चेस्ट में शूट हो गई, तो वो ऑन दी स्पॉट वहीं पे नीचे गिर गए। तो मैं तिरछा होकर खड़ा हुआ था, तो जो बुलेट थी वो मेरी चेस्ट के राइट हैंड साइड से अंदर एंट्री करी। मैं वहीं नीचे लेट गया, मेरी सांसें बंद होनी स्टार्ट हो गई थी। मेरे पास कोई और ऑप्शन नहीं था, मेरे पास एक ही ऑप्शन था। मैं फैमिली सबको याद किया, बट फिर भी मैं खड़ा हुआ कि मरना तो है ही है, बट ऐसे तड़प के नहीं मरेंगे। मैं जैसे ही सडनली खड़ा हुआ तो मेरे जो से लेफ्ट लेग है सर, इसके घुटने में आर पार बुलेट हुई। 5 मिनट जब इंसान को लगी हो तो इंसान, ये तो ऊपर वाले की कृपा थी सर, उसने खुद बचाया मेरे को आकर के।
Arjot, he was saved by some Ukrainian officers, but his parents didn't know that he had had such a close brush with death.
12:30 in the midnight, I received a call from the Prime Minister. He just told me that बहुत गंभीर स्थिति हो गया है and I want senior ministers to lead the evacuation team. So you will have to go by tomorrow itself.
The Indian ministers given responsibility to oversee the rescue operations in Europe were Mr. Jyotiraditya Scindia in Romania and Moldova, Mr. Kiran Rijiju in Slovakia, Minister Hardeep Singh Puri in Hungary, and General V.K. Singh in Poland.
See, what the Prime Minister said was, we have to coordinate everything diplomatically with our mission in Ukraine. How to get the students out, the exact means we have to find ourselves. But the aim should be to get them out as fast as possible.
The minister actually was sent as a kind of a statement of commitment to that government where you sent that minister. Okay, why? This is important enough for us. It shows you how much the PM himself is invested.
He was very clear in his direction. मैं आपको भेज रहा हूँ, हमारे भारतीय नागरिक युवाओं और युवती को वापस घर सुरक्षित लाना आपकी जिम्मेदारी है और मेरा निवेदन है कि आप लोग तभी वापस आएंगे जब उस देश से आखिरी फ्लाइट भारत वापस आएगी।
On March 1st, the special envoys of the 4 ministers reached their destinations and began overseeing the rescue operations. They were carrying special letters for the heads of state.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's astute decision to write personal letters to the heads of government of the countries neighboring Ukraine not only had an emotional effect on them, but it also helped to galvanize support for India's rescue operation.
When I went to Bratislava to hand over the special letter written by Modi ji, the Prime Minister of Slovakia was so overwhelmed, and he told me that your Prime Minister Modi ji has already spoke to him. He also instructed instantly that assistance to Indian operation must be at the highest level. So their foreign ministry, their military, their police, their aviation team were well coordinated before I could reach there.
Honorable Prime Minister felt going there as a special envoy with a letter from him to the heads of state and government would impress on the concerned government that the government of India takes this very seriously. Seriously enough for a senior minister to go there and camp there.
You go and deliver his letter to the President or the Prime Minister, whosoever in that country. Accordingly, it makes things better.
उनको पता है कि अभी भी 14,000 बच्चे फंसे हुए हैं और कोशिश हमारी ये है कि जितना जल्दी हो उनको निकालें।
At this point of time, a ray of hope emerged. The Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, lifted its curfew, and India saw a window to evacuate its nationals from Ukraine.
The ambassador and our staff have been at it, trying to get you people out.
Private airlines from India joined Air India, and it was all hands on deck to allow for the speedy evacuation of as many Indians as possible from this window of opportunity in the middle of a war.
They all came forward and they said, whatever is required, how many ever planes are required, we will create that movement to make sure that we bring our students back home.
But the big question remained, how do you move students safely out of Ukraine and to the neighboring countries?
You don't have buses, trucks, taxis, nothing. How do you move 450 students out across 8 kilometers when every 500 meters there is a blockade with such a huge number of people in a curfew time? So obviously we had to find ways to move them out.
अब देखिए भारत के तिरंगे की ताकत कभी हमें यहाँ अनुभव नहीं होता है। श्रद्धा होती है, सम्मान होता है, लेकिन ये ताकत भी है। जब यूक्रेन से बच्चे निकल रहे थे और किसी को वो भारत का तिरंगा दिखा देते थे तो सारी व्यवस्थाएं उसके पक्ष में खड़ी हो जाती थी।
सोशल मीडिया प्लेटफॉर्म्स पे इंफॉर्मेशन मिल रही थी कि वहाँ के स्टूडेंट्स ने इंडियन का फ्लैग लगाया था बस पे और वो सेफली निकल गए। बाकी सबको रोका गया चेकिंग के लिए बार बार। तो हमने भी यही किया कि बस के चारों तरफ इंडिया का फ्लैग लगा लिया और हम भी बॉर्डर सेफली पहुँच गए बिना किसी रिस्ट्रिक्शन से। जैसे दूसरे कंट्रीज के हो गए, पाकिस्तान हो गए और नाइजीरियन हो गए, वो लोग इंडियन फ्लैग्स अपने बसेस में ये करके पार किए हैं जो चेक पॉइंट है। तो फ्लैग देख के उन्होंने कुछ नहीं बोला और उन्होंने खुद ने हमको रास्ता दिया जाने के लिए।
तो उन बच्चों को भी लगना हमारा चमड़ी के रंग से भी ज्यादा हमारे तिरंगे का इतना ताकत थी कि उस देश में जहाँ इतना बड़ा संकट है, लोग अपने लिए मुसीबत में से गुजर रहे थे लेकिन तिरंगा देखते ही हमारी मदद करते थे।
हर घर तिरंगा happened in war-torn Ukraine, and wherever the Indian flag was flying, safe passage was ensured.
तो ये सारे ऑपरेशन ने तिरंगे की ताकत की अनुभूति कराई और सिर्फ उन बच्चों को कराई ऐसा नहीं, भारत में जिस ने सुना, जिस ने जाना, उसका भारत के तिरंगे की ताकत में भरोसा बढ़ गया।
While on the ground, the initial success of the evacuation was encouraging. There was misinformation, fake news, and conspiracy theories floating online that made communication and planning challenging for Operation Ganga.
Social media has got anonymity. All kinds of videos that were floating around, some true, some not true, some made up, and it becomes a great multiplier of disinformation.
What often happened is someone posts something about a problem in a particular area, that problem is resolved, but that post is not deleted and it's amplified. But these things happen. This is part of the game. This is part of the challenge.
When we were able to send out the imageries of what is happening on ground, everything is organized. Be assured. Plus, we also monitored the social media to see what kind of criticism or help people were asking for.
तो उस टाइम पोलैंड बॉर्डर बंद था, खोल नहीं रहे थे। फिर हमने सरकार से जो हेल्पलाइन आई थी उनसे बात की थी। उन्होंने हमें आश्वासन दिया कि आप घबराओ ना, थोड़ी आप पेशेंस रखो, ये हमारी सिरदर्दी है ज्यादा।
In the moment you create this communication line, it becomes simpler. So social media is both good and bad.
The border of Siret is close to 500 kilometers from Bucharest. Once the Indians from Ukraine arrived at the border, they had to further travel this distance by bus to the Bucharest shelter camp and await evacuation.
I looked at the map with the Romanian ambassador and I said, do we have any airports close to the border? She then indicated an airport called Suceava, which was a domestic airport, not an international airport. within 36 hours, Romanian government opened up a to track the student from the crossing of the border to coming to the shelter camp, from the shelter camp moving to the airport, from the airport tagging that person on the flight that they have taken, and then the same tag being given to the state government where the student is permanently domiciled, to be able to enable the state government to receive that student at the Delhi airport or the Mumbai airport and then arrange for their transport, safely see them all the way home.
जंग के बीच जान बचाकर इतनी ज्यादा संख्या में लोग पोलैंड पहुंच रहे हैं कि उनके रहने का इंतजाम करना मुश्किल हो रहा है। ऐसे में एक बड़े स्पोर्ट्स सेंटर को ही उनके रहने का ठिकाना बना दिया गया। तस्वीरों में ये कैंप पूरी तरह से खचाखच भरा नजर आया।
Once the students crossed over, a gigantic logistical support was required to house, feed, look after, and transport the thousands of students. And this is where the Indian diaspora stepped in selflessly, following the age-old maxim of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family.
Made some 160 plus calls to hotels, motels in the region. We had managed to discuss with a particular hotelier, and I still remember he thought probably I've lost it, what am I talking about, to get 250 mattresses in 24 hours. But he understood the situation, and he was kind enough to arrange things the way we wanted. So I called the Pikes company and asked them that if they could give roughly around 5,000 free SIM card, but to the surprise thanks that the company sent 20,000 SIM cards, not only for the Indians, they gave it to everybody who were crossing over with free GB internet.
All our citizens in those countries that were sitting and cooking up meals, arranging buses for transport, tending to students' medical needs, and it's on the scale that probably India has never seen before. Our NRIs really coming to the aid of our students.
In continuation with the spirit of India, the Prime Minister personally got in touch with the leaders of spiritual organizations.
दुनिया में कहीं पर भी रहने वाला भारतीय हो सकता है उसके पासपोर्ट का रंग बदल गया हो, लेकिन उसका हमारे साथ खून का रिश्ता है। हम पासपोर्ट का रंग नहीं देखते हैं, हम उस खून के रंग से जुड़े हुए हैं।
When the Prime Minister called, there was a deep concern in his voice. He said, Brahmavihari Swami, I request you to set up relief camps as soon as possible in any of the border towns of these countries, because thousands of our students are trapped. And instantly, BAPS Swaminarayan Samstha went into mobilizing its force to set up the relief camp.
Full marks to the social assistance providers. One's heart is filled with, such gratitude and humility. They were feeding people, no matter what numbers they came in. Each one of them, Hare Krishna, ISKCON, Seva Bharati. I mean, there was a case of an Indian restaurant owner from Vienna. He came in with his family, he's a Sikh, and he was serving 600 meals a day.
Like in Poland, in Warsaw you have a Gurdwara, you have a temple, you have people from Art of Living, you have people from Swaminarayan area. You have got Ashlar Mittal's set up out there.
Wipro or Infosys or Sun Pharma or a number of these companies that came to the fore.
As the war raged on, Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in touch with many world leaders, including the head of the European Union, the President of France, and the President of Poland, and thanked them all for relaxing their visa laws that made it easier for Indians to move to their country from the conflict zone. In some cases, the scenes reminded us of what happened 76 years ago.
Poland has a very special relationship. In Second World War, they sent out a lot of their children so that they could take refuge outside, and when the war finishes, they can come back. Otherwise, they would have all been killed. Now, they went to various countries and they were turned back from there. And ultimately, they landed in Jamnagar. And that is when the Jam Sahib said, they're all my children. He adopted them as his children. Poland holds us in a very special friendship because of this. And this is the reason why Indians who were coming out, they were all getting a Schengen visa for 15 days. No other country got it.
वॉर रूम से सबसे बड़ी ब्रेकिंग न्यूज खारकीव में एक छात्र की मौत की जानकारी आ रही है जिसका नाम नवीन बताया जा रहा है।
नवीन की जो डेथ हो गई, खारकीव का जो स्टूडेंट था, उसके लिए हम लोग को बहुत अफसोस रहा, बहुत तकलीफ रही।
Parents had lost their child and India had lost a son. It was a sad day for the country. Prime Minister Modi ordered the Indian Air Force to be pressed into action. The IAF quickly assembled its fleet of C-17 Globemaster transport aircrafts.
When Indian Air Force aircraft lands amongst the countrymen, it brings in great amount of confidence because the armed forces have their own image in the eyes of people as people who cannot fail.
Indian Army, number one.
Secondly, it has space. It can land on much shorter strips, and they were also used for taking the humanitarian aid.
Meanwhile, in Ukraine, a larger problem arose beyond Kiev. The eastern part of the country was now an active war zone. The students at Kharkiv were at risk. India decided it needed safe corridors to evacuate its citizens.
Prime Minister spoke to President Putin, and we got the Russians to say, look, we are moving our students. This time आप firing अपना बंद करो. The Russians had actually told us, saying in that direction there won't be firing. So we needed some safe way out, and we moved them to a nearby place called Pesochin.
It was a matter of pride to see that India takes a center stage in the global affairs. Nation first policy. There has been a fundamental restructuring of domestic policy and foreign and security policy after 2014.
By 3rd March, even though 18,000 Indian students had been evacuated from Ukraine, there was a big challenge for the Indian government. And this came from the two towns of Sumy and Kharkiv that lay close to the Russian border. In fact, Sumy, which was only 30 miles from the Russian border and had about 600 Indian students holed up in bunkers with very little hope and even lesser water and food.
We are students of Sumy State University. We are residing right now in first hostel. There is no electricity right now in a hostel, and there is no water available for us. So we would like to request government to give us some advisory how we can evacuate from here, because we may not die with this war zone, but we will die with scarcity of water and food. This is how we are collecting water. I think God have shown some mercy, so we are getting water by the snowfall.
मैं कश्मीर का हूँ, तो हमारे यहाँ जब वाटर की रेस्ट्रिक्शंस होती है कुछ, तो हम मेल्ट करते हैं वहाँ पे पानी। उस चीज़ का एक्सपीरियंस थी मुझे, तो मैं फ्रेश वगैरह होने के लिए और बर्तन धोने के लिए मेल्ट किए बॉटल में। शाम के टाइम में 5-6 o'clock के आसपास अटैक हो गया सुमी पे। हमारे सामने एयर स्ट्राइक हो रही है। उस दिन ऐसा लग रहा था कि ये हमारी रात जो है आखिरी है।
It was a three-way problem. In a sense, वो अपना करते थे जो करना था. So Kiev was not able to necessarily give us the lines to these people.
Harjot, who had been hospitalized since being shot at on 28th of February, finally woke up on the 3rd of March. It was now time to tell his parents about his brush with death.
मम्मी को मैंने कॉल करके वीडियो कॉल पे मम्मी पूछती कहाँ पे है। मैं कहा मम्मी हिम्मत है? मम्मी कहती बहुत हिम्मत है। पर मम्मी को अपनी बॉडी दिखाई, सब कुछ दिखाया, तो मॉम ट्राई करने, मम्मी रोना स्टार्ट हो गई।
जब उसने नीचे करके दिखाया तो उसके पाइप वगैरह लगे हुए थे, यहाँ ब्लड गया। अब ये तो आप जान ही सकते हो कि माँ बाप के दिल में क्या आ सकता है उस टाइम।
मैंने मम्मी को ये बोला, मैं मम्मी आपने शेर पैदा किया, मैं मरता नहीं मैं।
Harjot was a sheikh. He had survived. But so were the hundreds of Indians who walked hundreds of kilometers to the borders of Ukraine, often with minimum or no food and water.
We had to do something special for Sumy. If Indian diplomats actually went to Sumy, it would reassure the students, if we can come from here, they can come out from there. So we sent two very senior officers from Delhi, Russian-speaking officers.
Both the Joint Secretary JP Singh and I, we speak Russian language, and so we were asked and we immediately agreed to proceed to Ukraine.
इशू ये था कि उस 1-2 घंटे में आपको कोई नीचे ग्राउंड टीम चाहिए, और उस कोऑर्डिनेशन के लिए हम लोगों को भेजा गया था।
एक बार हम तय कर लेंगे करना है तो मेरे देश के सेना के जवान, हमारे देश के विदेश विभाग में काम करने वाले लोग, हमारे देश के डायस्पोरा, हमारे देश ने अब तक बनाए हुए संबंध, इन सबका सामर्थ्य इतना है कि अब भारत दुनिया में ऐसे किसी भी संकल्प को लेकर के जाता है तो पूरा भी करता है।
Meanwhile, in Sumy, the fighting had escalated and some 600 old Indian students were caught up there.
Sumy was stuck because it's close to the border where the conflict was happening, and the conflict there was intense. And we were lining up whatever available transport to see that they get out. Question was, how soon would we find that corridor of safety, and for how long would that corridor of safety last?
करीबन 8 बजे का टाइम था, पीएम शाम को, तो मैंने खिड़की खोली तो सम एक्सप्लोजन्स हुए वहाँ पे। आई वाज लिटरली, मतलब मेरे को बहुत ज्यादा वो डर लगा तब। मैंने फिर मतलब ऑलमाइटी को याद किया, मेरे को लगा कि आज तो शायद लास्ट दिन है।
While the war escalated, the Indian embassy in Hungary requested that all Indian students reach Budapest for safe extraction. The embassy of India in Poltava city tweeted and reassured the Indian students stranded in Sumy that safe passage would be arranged. Meanwhile, more Indian students returned home.
Border guards were also quite, at that point of time, a little perplexed and were asking, why are you entering Ukraine when everybody is actually going out?
हर 5 किलोमीटर और 10 किलोमीटर के दायरे में बैरिकेड्स लगे हुए थे, ट्रेंचेस खुदे हुए थे। गाड़ी के अंदर घुस के आपसे पूछा जाता था कि आप कहाँ जा रहे हैं। आप ये सोचिए कि पूरा यूक्रेन एक साइड में बाहर जा रहे हैं, एक्सोडस, मास एक्सोडस हो रहा है, बाहर जा रहे हैं बचने के लिए, और आप अंदर जा रहे हैं।
It took us nearly 40 hours to reach a place called as Poltava, where we established camp.
वहाँ पे जाके हमें पता चला सुमी के जो इनर सर्कल है वो रशियन फोर्सेस ने कंट्रोल की हुई थी, और जो आउटर सर्कल है वो यूक्रेनियन फोर्सेस ने कंट्रोल किया हुआ था। जब तक आपका रशियन और यूक्रेनियन दोनों के साथ कोऑर्डिनेशन नहीं होगा, तब तक आप कुछ भी नहीं कर सकते।
On 7th March, something unparalleled in modern conflicts happened.
It was 7th of March and we were told that today evacuation will happen and you have to keep it like a secret, even don't tell your parents. And we were like happy, like finally this is the day.
So the first time we got the green corridor signal, we got them all out and they were all practically sitting in the buses.
3 buses came and it was like green corridor will be provided, and then 3 buses will go to Poltava, then they will drop students, then it will come back and others will go. It was like that.
But there was still that element of doubt because they had to transverse about 25 to 40 kilometers till they reached the railway station to move out to safety. That could not be assured or guaranteed.
With minutes to go before the start of the evacuation, India decided not to go ahead.
We actually had a situation, we boarded them on the buses and the firing started. I mean, can you imagine the morale of somebody कि आप बस तक बैठ गए and now you have to leave the bus and go back into the dorm.
What is at stake is a life. The life of someone as vulnerable and dear as maybe a child, a student. And therefore, you have to be 500% sure before you could think of advising someone to do something. And Indians there were your responsibility.
Meanwhile, in Sumy, Indian students, they had begun to lose hope and thus posted a video on social media. But this posed a greater challenge because they said,
"We have waited a lot and we cannot wait anymore. We are risking our life. We are moving towards."
The challenge was to stop them from walking into the line of fire.
The Sumy students naturally got very upset because they were seeing people from other areas go and ये लोग फंस गए and उनको लगा कि what about us? I had colleagues here who were regularly talking to them. It was almost like counseling them, saying, "Look, don't do something which will put yourself in."
On 9th March, the multiple channels that were working at the rescue of Indian students from Sumy gave a reassurance to the Indian government, and a green corridor had been established for India to evacuate its students.
Prime Minister spoke to President Putin, he spoke to President Zelensky. तो उन्होंने हमें जगह बताई A, B, C, D, E, ये आपका कॉरिडोर है, you take this route.
From Poltava, when we started our mission for Sumy to evacuate our students, and when we met them, they were so happy.
When the students saw us, some of them came and hugged us and they were crying.
And they felt that someone was there. Someone came all from Delhi to rescue them. A team was there from the government of India has sent a team to rescue them.
14 buses proudly displaying the Indian tricolour picked up Indian students from Sumy and started moving them towards safety in West Ukraine and beyond.
The students from Sumy have now reached Lviv. Thereafter, there will be a special train that will take them from Lviv across over the Poland border, from where they will then board their plane to Mother India.
I'm happy to say that I was there at the station with my overcoat and my cap on, and all these kids were there, and we were there at the station waving the flag.
हमारी evacuation थी वो one of the best evacuation थी जो possible नहीं थी क्योंकि we were stuck. मैं जिस फ्लाइट में आया वो लास्ट फ्लाइट थी, वो आर्मी की फ्लाइट थी. बहुत अच्छा फील हुआ, प्राउड मोमेंट था हम लोगों के लिए.
I'm a Krishna Bhakt. And I do remember my father used to always tell this Hare Murare Madhukaituvare Govinda Gopala Mukunda Saure Jagya Narayana Krishna Vishnu Nirasrayaman Jagadisaraksha. So when you think you are reaching a point where you see no avenue, think of the one you trust, have confidence in, and the Almighty will show you the way.
Finally, we are going home. Like everyone was happy, crying, emotional. That was the moment when we started saying Jai Hind.
That was the last batch that was coming in. We also had 4-legged friends in that. I think that day we had about 12 of them or 13 of them. We also had Harjot.
लाभ 1 को मिला हो, 5 को मिला हो, 50 को मिला हो, 1000 को मिला हो, 20,000 को मिला हो, लेकिन बैक होम 140 करोड़ देशवासियों में विश्वास जगाता, उसमें एक सामर्थ्य पैदा करता है.
For a lot of countries, just getting 2 planes and getting people out was a very big deal. Look, we got 90 flights out.
As the last flight as part of Operation Ganga landed at Hindon Air Force Base, over 22,500 Indians had been evacuated from the war zone.
शायद दुनिया का कोई देश भी अपने नागरिकों को ऐसे संकट से बाहर लाने के लिए इतना बड़ा साहस नहीं कर सकता है जितना बड़ा साहस भारत ने किया।
Believe me, when India speaks, a lot of things happen, and that is why I think today our voice is very important.
ऑपरेशन गंगा का प्लान बहुत ज्यादा सक्सेसफुल हुआ, बहुत अच्छा था, इसीलिए बच्चे वापस आ गए। ठीक है, नहीं तो बच्चों को आना बहुत मुश्किल था।
एक एक इंडियन, एक एक बच्चा सेफ आया है, तो ये इंडियन गवर्नमेंट के लिए हम लोगों की तरफ से बहुत ही बड़ी उपलब्धि है।
ये वाकई बहादुरी वाली बात है कि उस मुल्क के अंदर से जहाँ इतने बम चल रहे हैं, रॉकेट चल रही है, मिसाइलें चल रही हैं, वहां से निकालना काबिल तारीफ है। गवर्नमेंट ने जो किया है वो नामुमकिन मुमकिन बनाया।
Operation Ganga was successful from many angles and historic, and the biggest ever operation not only by India, by any country from a war zone.
हमें इंडियन गवर्नमेंट ने बहुत अच्छी सुविधाएं दी, हमारे लिए फ्लाइट अवेलेबल थे।
भगवान के बाद अगर घर में नाम लिया जा रहा था तो सर वो आप थे। मोदी जी हमें बचा लेंगे, अब जो भी कर सकते हैं मोदी जी कर सकते हैं।
हमारा इंडिया इतना अच्छा है कि हमारे फ्लैग के जरिए दूसरे नेशंस के लोग निकल रहे हैं।
And it's best encapsulated by a comment that was made by a 6-year-old girl on one of the flights. The child turned around to me and said, "Uncle, मोदी जी को मेरे तरफ से थैंक यू कह देना." That to you is the sum and substance of Operation Ganga.
Operation Ganga is a remarkable example of how a government delivers in the most trying circumstances and implements a highly complex rescue mission from a war zone.
ऑपरेशन गंगा सफल होने में रत्ती भर भी सवालिया निशान नहीं था। वो सफल होगा, एक एक बच्चा लौट के आएगा, उनके माँ बाप के जो सपने हैं उन सपनों को मैं चूर चूर नहीं होने दूंगा, और वो हो सका।